Hey, good morning, everybody. How is everybody doing? Great. Great to see you, Brian. Hi, Carol, you're back. Great. Steve, Diane, Charlie, good morning. Alberto, doctor, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you so very much. We're really excited. It's been we've already gone through one session. We went through a series of breaks, and we also just got off a fantastic one-on-one, if you will, dialogue with Councilman David Robinson from Houston. And, it was great just as a first step, engagement, initiating this forum, to hear from him with regard to what Houston's gone through, certainly with the floods, certainly with what happens when natural disasters hit. What is the factor of resiliency within that community? What is even the factor of resiliency amongst all those who represent the design profession, the construction professions, the engineers, even the owners and developers that are just so integrally involved in the survival of that city. And it was great to hear from him some of the, if you will, provocative ideas, if you will, that really go outside the box. I mean, outside the box on how survivability of a community, survivability of a segment of Texas can actually overcome all the natural disasters that hit. Everything from technology, such as what we're getting ready to talk about in a little bit, but also just from daily living. How do we get from one day to the next? Communication, community, all the other things that drive us from to and fro. So here again, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us in this segment of our opening engagement as we go into smart living. And our moderator is going to be Diane Cullen-Levin, by the way, whom is speaking to us from Seattle, Washington. And, when she and I first met, it was an amazing connection because we talked about not only just what we do professionally, but one of the neat things that has happened by way of Zoom and other platforms of communication, we also had a chance to learn about one another. And we learned about our families, we learned about our kids, we learned about what really drives us professionally, but also personally. And, in speaking with her in the first 5 minutes of our 1 hour and a half discussion, it was almost as if I've known Diane for years. And this has been actually one of the neat things about this platform that we have. Whichever platform you use on a daily basis, in this case, what we're using right now is Zoom, though I know everyone within the sound of my voice, you're using Whova, but Diane and I, we connected for quite some time, and it was such a blessed connection, and it's been great getting to know her and to work with her on this endeavor as we move into it. Having said that, it's 10:02. I don't want to lose any more time, so let me do this. As part of my role as MC, I need to also introduce the topic that we're getting ready to move into. And you know what, and another thought just came to mind that I don't want to lose sight of. Diane and I, one of the things we talked about, and I'll keep this short, Carol, I promise. One of the things that Diane and I talked about is the fact that, as I share with my own kids, when you make a connection, never lose sight of that connection. Even if you think that you'll never see that person again, even if you think you'll never speak to them again, see them again, I tell them, don't think that way. You will run into them again. You don't know when, you don't know where. It could be on the other side of this earth, which has happened. And so I say that from the mere perspective that she can speak from her life with her husband and the adoptees that they brought home to the United States from China, and another family that they lived with or they knew in some other location here on earth in the United States. And they had no idea that they would be coming together again back in her city of Seattle. And certainly, Diana, you can tell this story far better than I am because I'm butchering it completely. But this other couple that they met also adopted some twins from China, and they happen to have come from this very same location in China, and now they're all back together again in Seattle. So I lay that story out from the pure perspective of connectivity. And this pandemic has brought us together in so many ways, and of closeness and distance, but we're still connected. And it was such a marvelous story that she shared with me. So I'll allow Diane to speak a little bit further on that, if at all possible. But let me go ahead, and I see that she's smiling. So I guess I did an okay job in going through that little tidbit. All right, so smart living. This session that we're about to engage, it's looking at the means of how we truly live and experience a smart city. Technology, though it may bring many advantages, it also brings some unintended consequences. The demands not only the right hardware and the right software, but it also requires some digitally savvy citizens and leaders to actually spearhead that process of engagement. To attract and retain diverse citizens requires a culture that encourages and supports all people, all kinds of people from all different backgrounds, abilities, and so on. And so from that, we arrive at the following: a true sense of place that merges the old and the new without losing the unique personality of a city. And that even goes back to some of the things that Councilman Robinson was talking about. So our presenters and panelists will discuss the various efforts, examples from academia, design, and urban planning and development that addresses these challenges. Now, in a little bit, we're going to go into a poll, and I'll get to that in a moment, but I want to speak specifically about Diane. And I'm going to speak in some components, just shooting off of some of the things that I said a little bit ago with regard to who she is in Seattle, but who she is as an individual as well. But let me speak to her as the founder and CEO of Quad 2 International. And here again, Diana, she's going to be our moderator for this session on smart living, topic number 1. Diane, she comes from a seller doer background and in the field of architecture, and she's a Stephen Covey aficionado. I love Stephen Covey as well. For 10 years, Diane has implemented Covey's philosophies extensively while running her own architectural practice. After selling her firm and embarked on combining the seller doer model that she grew up with along with Covey's philosophies into a client-focused change management system. And that system is primarily within the construction industry. Moving on, Diana's mantra is relationships matter. And I can't agree more. I mean, everything that we do in this industry of the OAEC side of this pandemic, especially, the relationships matter. Everything is bound and sold on relationships. Everything that we do is confined to those relationships and how we take care of those relationships. So working with the right clients, as she says, and having the right team requires strong, authentic relationships, and these happen when the cultures align. Stephen Covey advocated that most of us spend too much time on what is urgent and not enough time on what is important. Quadrant 2 activities, therefore, are important and not urgent. Success and successful teams spend focused time in Quadrant 2, relationship building, planning, and empowering their team members. Speaking from her background academically, she's received her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Design from the California State University, Long Beach, and is a native from Chicago, and has lived in Southern California, Washington, D.C., London, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, Seattle. Some of her notable clients include Skanska, McKinstry, Swinnerton Builders, Snyder, Glumac, North Coast Electric, University Mechanical, LCS Constructors, Russell Investments, and many, many more. I am honored to know, as I can say now, to know Diana, and it's been great just talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to the mechanisms that you use in moderating this panel. And before we go into that, I know that I'm instructed to also go into a poll, but Diane, I just want to let you know, thank you so much for the time that you allowed me to speak with you. Thank you so much for the time that you shared with me as well, because I feel that I know you so well. And here again, we did it over the phone at that time. And so now I can see you. I'll be able to hear your voice and obviously everybody else speaking. And I'm just looking forward to this engagement. So with that, let's go into this poll. And team, i.e. Charlie, I'm probably going to need a little bit of your guidance here as we move into that poll. So apparently I need to go to WOVA to check on this. And so Charlie, if you can chime in and kind of guide me further into the next steps with regard to this poll, I would welcome that.
Carlos, you got that exactly right. You're just...
Go ahead.
You are just going to...
Oh, Charlie, you're echoing. I'll assist here.
We're just going to go to the WOVA app and you'll be able to see the polls. Also, you might check your phone because we also texted them to us. That might make it easy.
So let me just add to that. The polls are under additional resources on the event home. Just go to event home and then scroll down and you'll see additional resources, and you'll see on mine, it's on the right-hand side and it says polls. So just click on that and then it'll come up. I've answered the 2 that I can answer so far already. And so that's where you go ahead and make your answer. Couple of good questions. Carlos, you're muted.
This is the value of having a great team. So how does the discussion of technology being a component of public safety make you feel regarding privacy concerns? So everyone, please partake of that poll. And it is 10:10. So with that, I'm going to officially introduce Diane to the table, have Diane actually chime in. And Charlie and Carol, once those poll results are up and as Diane is getting ready to engage, let's please dive into those results.
And well, Carlos, let me make a suggestion because I know we got timing here for presentations. We can look at that in our panel discussion.
Okay.
The poll results.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Very good. Awesome.
All right, Diane.
Well, thank you, Carlos, for that great introduction. The only poignant point you missed in the story is that after we got back from China with our first daughter, a block away from us was another family that had brought their daughter back a little earlier than we had, and they were both in the same orphanage in China. Talk about a small world story. And we've both lived a lot of places. And thank you, Carol and Carla, for having me today. Can the audience see all of us, or are they only seeing me at the moment?
Just you, Diane.
Just me. Okay.
Whoever's speaking.
Okay, then I will share my
Diane,
slides.
unless you're on, if you're on your phone app watching this presentation, you can actually scroll through and you'll see all of the presenters.
Okay. Well, I will share my screen then. So hold on. All right. Can you see this? Is that on the screen?
Yep, it is.
Future proof?
Good.
All right, all right. So I am, as Carlos said, the moderator for topic 1, which is living in a smart city. And this is one of the very many definitions of a smart city. And my definition is that I feel that living in a smart city is like the culture of a city. It's keeping what's unique about it, what attracts people to it, and combining that with smart ways to make everyone's life better. So today we have public, private, and academic contributions to our discussion on smart city living. So our first panelist has all three, public, private, and academic experience. Dr. Ted Lehr is a data architect with the City of Austin. On the Austin Smart City team, Dr. Lehr advises on technology, business partnerships, and the use of data for better services, more open government, and development of opportunities for universities, entrepreneurs, and other non-government sector entities. Dr. Lehr lectures in computer science at Texas State University, where he's been recognized as an outstanding part-time faculty and designated a favorite professor by the honor students. I too have had time to talk with Dr. Lehr as we prepared for this, and I'm not surprised that he has received those honors. Dr. Lehr has over 20 years of experience in the private sector, working for both large and small companies. He grew up in Ohio and received his Bachelor of Science and Arts in Electrical Engineering and Philosophy from Bucknell, and his Master's and PhD in Electrical and Computer Engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Lehr will be moderating our breakout discussion on transportation and autonomous vehicles. Cheers in the chat for Dr. Lehr. All right, this is hard. And now I know what the stand-up comedians feel like on the night shows.
Thank you, Doctor, for joining us.
Brian Dillard has had a career in the military, private, and public sectors. Mr. Dillard began his career in public service in 2018 as the Smart City Administrator for the City of San Antonio, and he is currently the Chief Innovation Officer for the city. Prior to joining the local government sector, Mr. Dillard was a cybersecurity consultant in the private sector, working with Shell Oil, Chevron Oil, Lockheed Martin, and Delta Risk. Brian began his career as a member of the United States Air Force, where he served 10 years active duty as a cybersecurity operations specialist. Upon returning to San Antonio toward the end of his military career, Brian became a neighborhood advocate and community leader. He is a third-generation East Side San Antonio native, currently residing in Dignity Hill with his wife, Francesca, and their dog, Pepper. He graduated magna cum laude from Ellis University with a bachelor's degree in political science. He is going to share with us agency and equity in the smart city. Cheers in the chat for Brian Dillard. Thank you, Brian. Next, we have Dr. Alberto Gomez, who is co-founder and COO of Iris, a top 100 smart city data and analytics technology company that improves the lives of communities through the use of technology. Dr. Gomez is a professor at the Faculty of Law and Social Sciences at the Universidad Autónoma de Tamaulipas. How'd I do?
Good.
In addition, he is currently a guest scholar at the Urban Future Lab at UTSA. Alberto's work with the 311 SAF for the city of San Antonio has been recognized with a Smart 50 Award for Community Engagement Innovation. He publishes in multiple scholarly journals and is a contributor to the World Economic Forum, one of my favorite places to go for data. Born in Texas, Dr. Gomez has lived in Mexico, Spain, Poland, and Italy. He received a bachelor's in journalism and marketing from the University of Texas Pan American and his master's and PhD in communications from the Universidad de Santiago de Compostela. Dr. Gomez is going to share with us his perspective on improving life in communities through technology and human-centered design. Cheers in the chat for Dr. Gomez. And last but not least, we have Steve Brown, the Assistant General Manager with the San Antonio River Authority, affectionately known as SARA. Mr. Graham directs watershed engineering and operations, utilities, environmental sciences, real estate, and parks for the city. He is responsible for the operation and development of water and wastewater treatment facilities, environmental protection, promotion of low-impact development, and water quality in the San Antonio River Basin, plus advancement of flood control. Mr. Graham is passionate about intergovernmental cooperation and collaboration for more efficient, effective, and innovative public service. Prior to Sarah, Mr. Graham worked as an engineer at the Texas Department of Highways and Public Transportation. Steve lived all over as a child with a military father, ending up in Texas to finish his middle and high school education. His wife is a fifth-generation Texan, and she still views him as a transplant. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M and is a member of the Chi Epsilon Engineering Honor Society. Mr. Graham is going to share with us flood and watershed resiliency using smart technologies. Cheers in the chat for Steve Graham. Sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. There he is. One last thing. As you are listening to the presentations, please use the Ask a Question app within your WOVA. We will deal with questions at the end after each of the presentations have been made, and we will get to as many questions as possible. And now I would like to turn it over to Mr. Brian Dillard.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to pull up my slides here and we'll get rolling. So as Diane mentioned, I'm Brian Dillard. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the City of San Antonio. Can you guys see my slide okay? Everybody
Yes.
see my slide? Okay, excellent. I've been with the city for about 2 years now. And before that, as she mentioned, I was working cybersecurity privately with a private company. But after hours, I was doing all this community stuff. I was on boards for our transit authority, for local community centers, doing a lot of stuff with elections and politics. And I realized that's where the passion was around the community and kind of community, helping the community develop, helping the city develop. And so opportunity came open for this smart city thing with the city of San Antonio, and I jumped at it and was lucky enough to get the position. So definitely happy to be here and be speaking on what exactly do we think about smart cities and all that. So the focus of my discussion is going to be on agency and equity in the smart city. So we'll start off by defining what exactly those terms mean, because I know a lot of times equity can be mixed up with equality, in some rooms and some discussions, and then agency, probably the first thing you think of is an insurance agency. But in this case, what we're really talking about when we talk about agency is really the ownership that residents feel within their community and their city. And that's something that gets oftentimes left out, because municipal agencies are encouraged to do things in a much quicker manner than usual. Especially nowadays in 2020, when you have telecommunications and everything else, people expect you to move a lot quicker. But you also have to identify transparency and accountability and all the procurement procedures and all that. But at the same time, you're supposed to serve the resident at a quick rate. So within that, we don't want to lose the idea that we're doing this with the residents. When it comes to smart cities and innovation, we're doing this with them and not for them or at them. I think that's a tough line to draw and a tough thing to define, but we'll do that a little bit more throughout the presentation. I'll give you some examples of how our office is taking that on when it comes to smart cities, how our Smart SA program is taking that on. And then equity. So we have the ownership piece, making sure that the resident is involved in the development from the ground level of what these solutions are, identifying those problems that we're actually solving for. Then the equity piece. So equity is different from equality. Equity really is focused in on how do we make sure we're making up for years, decades, centuries of disenfranchisement in neighborhoods and communities that are still suffering today because of those disenfranchisements. So we talk about redlining, we talk about lack of investment, we talk about racism, sexism, classism, all the isms. Those have had an effect for years, and those have never really been able to be repaired, especially financially. So for years, for decades, cities have invested in an equal manner. It's spreading the peanut butter across the entire city. And that does not solve for those kind of systemic issues in those communities. So that discussion doesn't change when it comes to smart cities and innovative investments. When we come to smart streetlights or the way we deploy digital inclusion efforts, those really have to be focused with a lens of equity. And I'm sure if you have lived in San Antonio and have heard from our mayor or our council, you have heard that statement over and over again, that lens of equity item. And it's something that we've embedded within our smart city approach, and something that we really prioritize as we move forward. jump to the next slide. So let's define what smart cities look like to us from the city of San Antonio and Office of Innovation. Really, there's a kind of a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 model that was established or kind of identified back in 2015, where Smart City 1.0 is really like technology vendor driven. So if you've seen the scooters kind of drop into your city, or if you've seen rideshare just pop up, that's really a technology vendor driven item. That's something where the city didn't ask for it. It just showed up and innovation happened. It's you can call it disruptive technology at times, but it is what it is. And so that's kind of the example of that 1.0 model. 2.0 is really tech enabled, government driven. So in the city of San Antonio, we have the digital kiosks. They're, kind of the huge smartphones that line up the Riverwalk, line up at the Missions and elsewhere. And you go there, you do wayfinding and all that good stuff. That was really a government-driven item. That was something that a council member or city manager went to another city like Denver and saw, and then brought it back and said, "Hey, let's do that. Looks really cool." It may not solve for problems that residents have identified, but it definitely adds value to the community landscape. And then we get to 3.0. So this is really where we try to operate from our smart cities perspective most of the time. And this is not to say that 1.0 or 2.0 are totally exclusive from what we're doing. We definitely enjoy seeing disruptive technology. We enjoy being the welcome door for those technologies to come in. But our approach is really that 3.0 approach. It's the resident co-creation approach. And I'll give you an example of how that works later on with our vendor summit. I'll give you an example of that. But this resident co-creation is really about government and community having a conversation and identifying challenges, and then driving those down to the vendors and saying, solve for that. Don't just give me your new shiny piece of technology. Don't just give me what you gave every other city. I have custom issues, and those issues may be replicated in other cities, but I really need you to solve for that bottom of the barrel issue. Digital inclusion, homelessness. I need you to really look at that. I think it was Austin's mayor, Austin city manager, he left Austin, he drove somewhere else and went to a seminar, and they asked him, what defines your city as a smart city? And he said, as I drove out of Austin, I drove by a homeless encampment on sidewalk after sidewalk. He said, that to me is not a smart city. And I think that is really where we're going with the definition of smart cities. Who are we serving in these areas? So when it comes to Smart SA is our smart city program here at the city of San Antonio. It's a partnership among 9 partners, including Steve's organization, San Antonio River Authority, but also CPS Energy, via our transit authority, our local one of our local universities, UTSA, et cetera, et cetera. This partnership was really intended to make sure that we're working in lockstep and collaborative effort to build this smart city. So our vision is really to be a connected, inclusive, and resilient community supporting a high quality of life. It's that simple for us. That can encompass everything from transit to digital inclusion to housing. All across the board, that's what we're looking at. Got the yellow card. Either I cursed or I have 3 minutes left. So when we talk about these 3 components of connected, inclusive, resilient, connected, it's really about making sure that as we offer these new opportunities that the community can connect to them, whether it be a digital connection or a mobile connection. I mean, mobility, transportation. So making sure that we offer that access to everyone, inclusiveness, making sure that everybody's a part of that conversation as we build this out. And then of course, resiliency. So resiliency, we're trying to pivot that a little bit, I think. So resiliency used to really identify sustainability and environmental concerns and opportunities like that. But when we talk about resiliency with the smart city overall, we don't want to get bucketed into that. We have our kind of focus areas, environmental, housing, and all that. Resiliency for us, what we're trying to pivot that to is more of ownership from residents over what this program looks like. So if Brian Dillard and his team pull back, if we all go away all of a sudden, is this program, is it sustainable? Does the community have ownership enough for it to be resilient, for it to build where it needs to build to, and to stay successful? So that's really that resiliency piece. A smart city, if a smart city is depending on one team, it's not truly a smart city. What does it look like? So here's the fun part. So we'll talk about those kind of, opportunities that we challenged when it comes to the co-creation model. So earlier I mentioned the vendor summit, and I mentioned the kind of government coming together with community and pushing those challenges down. We had a vendor summit our 5th month into the office. Our first 3 months were spent doing a community survey within our 3 innovation zones, identifying the challenges that residents were facing day to day. The reason we did that is because we were planning on having a vendor summit. We had 150 vendors come in person to the convention center here in San Antonio, and we didn't have them pitch to us. We pitched to them. We had subject matter experts from across all fields, housing authority, the river authority, Edwards Aquifer, our water systems, energy provider. We had them sit in front of the vendors all day and say, here's the challenges that we gathered from residents. Here's what we've defined that we need you to solve for. Now pitch to us based on that. And we didn't ask them to pitch that day. We sent them home with all the recordings of the entire day. It's actually still up on the website. But this was our opportunity to say to vendors, hey, we know you don't know everything. And we have that first upfront, kind of interaction with residents. So we'll give that to you. That was really that co-creation model. And we really tried to challenge, the kind of traditional basis of vendors just pitching us technology. The second part was the Smart SA Sandbox. So this was really about residents. So we're planning on deploying, and we're actually deploying right now, our smart streetlight project, where we have all these use cases from air quality to parking detection, but also smart streetlight controls for our CPS energy. Now, what we needed to do is make sure that residents were comfortable with this technology as they saw these little pieces of technology being mounted onto telephone poles throughout the city. So we had a Smart SA Sandbox, and it really is a sandbox. It's a place for kids and parents to come out and interact with the technology that we're either thinking of deploying or gather ideas from them on things that they think are cool or helpful in their lives, or as in this case, put in front of them technology that we're about to deploy that is a response to a challenge that they've identified. So we put the technology out to them, allow them to ask questions, break it down, ask me everything. Are there cameras on it? It's usually the biggest question. Are there cameras on it? No cameras on it. I'll show you what it looks like. So that's another way to get residents involved into any kind of development that's going on. And the last but not least is our digital divide survey. So right now we're executing a $27 million project for digital inclusion. This is efforts all across the board, but mainly focused on students. We did a digital divide survey from, I got my red card. We did a digital divide survey from December to February of this year. Luckily, we got that survey phase done before COVID hit, because with COVID hit, everybody realized, oh, digital inclusion is a thing and it's an issue. So we started to address that with that survey, and it was very exciting. A great example of how we work with Bexar County, UTSA to really gather ideas from the residents and identify where the challenges are. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the panelists. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we have Dr. Alberto Gomez. I will turn it over to you.
All right.
Where did he go? There he is.
Thank you, Diane. Let me set up my presentation. Oh, wait. First, I need to share my screen. All right. Can you see the screen already? Excellent.
Looks good.
Well, thank you. Well, welcome to everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to share some of our work. And as an entrepreneur and scholar, I often wear multiple hats. And today I'm speaking as a co-founder and chief operating officer for IRIS, and as a guest scholar at the Urban Future Lab in UTSA. Now, at IRIS, we build AI-driven tools that engage communities to bring real-time visibility and analytics for urban stakeholders. And the Urban Future Lab is a think and do research center focused on community impact and sustainable development. In this presentation, I will talk about the work we do at both organizations. First, the challenges that we address, and second, I will share our vision on how we address these challenges. And finally, using some case studies, I will highlight how our work supports asset management and public engagement efforts during the development of maintenance of infrastructure projects, while always focusing on improving the quality of life in communities. So 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas right now, but according to figures from the United Nations, that number is expected to grow to 70% by the year 2050. And as such, urban infrastructure challenges will continue to increase, especially in disenfranchised communities with vulnerable populations. Now, these communities expect urban stakeholders to consistently deliver services that affect their daily lives. And however, private and public organizations sometimes do not have reliable communication channels today. and their processes are often broken or outdated, and residents face difficulty communicating urgent problems or concerns. Another one of the biggest challenges for urban stakeholders is managing expectations from the community they serve. And currently, transparency and accountability are not part of that community outreach process. So how can we close the engagement loop, enabling a two-way communication channel and collaborative communities? So our vision focuses on how technology, community engagement, and human-centered design can be leveraged to create scalable solutions that not only give rise to smart cities, but more importantly, enable resilient, collaborative, and smart communities. The Harvard Ashe Center for Public Administration Innovation, McKinsey, recently published an article on the importance of digital transformation and leveraging data for organizations. While there are many possible ways to describe this value in the urban management sector, some of the most practical and straightforward axes are: first, the financial return attributable to analytical efforts, improvements in operations process achieved thanks to analytical and data approaches, and increased faith in urban stakeholders attributable to data and transparency efforts. At Iris, we combine these human-centered design principles, data, and creativity to create an interactive collaborative community digital experience. We place an emphasis on achieving an engagement loop, which, in addition to providing more effective communication, has a gamified layer that informs and builds community. We collaborate with design and consultancy, cities, and universities on three areas. First, reducing expenses. By crowdsourcing citizen opinion through our products, firms can save on any potential expenses that would have been spent hosting and planning community workshops. And in addition, crowdsourcing allows for firms to get more accurate, up-to-date data on citizen opinion, thus allowing for the firm to make better informed design choices. Improving productivity. By focusing on taking full advantage of crowdsourcing, resident opinion through the platform can directly provide feedback on existing projects and ideas on future projects. This community interaction is much more efficient than traditional community workshops. And in the middle of this pandemic, it ensures the safety of all participants. Also increasing resident satisfaction, because by putting community residents at the middle of the design process, we can achieve larger inclusivity and ownership. And residents can directly provide their input on city projects, ensuring that the community's voice is taken into account. This leading to projects that are better reflect the wants and needs of city residents and community support. Using human-centered design approach, we built a platform that, on top of an integrated data ecosystem, allows community managers to access a powerful, easy-to-use interface to stay on top of work management and public involvement efforts. And when we talk about smart cities, I agree with what Brian says. Most people think of sensors, cameras, and automated facilities that improve operational efficiencies that are installed from top to bottom. And yet, the bigger producers of data are people. And we should be thinking about fostering smart citizens by crowdsourcing information that help build resilient communities. In 2008, 2 years ago, we launched 311 SA, an application that innovated the way residents and city government collaborated in keeping their communities in good shape. We implemented a layer of social dynamics and gamification that generated an increase in civic engagement in the city of San Antonio. Currently, we have over 50,000 users, over 180,000 service requests received, and 92% of those service requests have been successfully attended, which is fantastic. And that project has given us a lot of momentum and recognition. Another example is recently the Office of Brian and other departments of the city launched a challenge to design a one city application. And in collaboration with Red Square, a local design and research firm, we conducted interviews with residents and public officials to learn firsthand about their needs, wants, and frustrations. And we learned about the services they wanted to access and what would make their lives easier. In essence, we created a crowdsourced application that was built by the feedback and active participation from all members of the community, as opposed to implementing a tool from a top-down approach. So this is Smart City 3.0. Instead, we created something that inherently ensures ownership from the community with 4 core elements: a personalized experience, an AI-powered app and chatbot service that learns from the user's feedback, location-based recommendations, and modular and scalable. A big part of our focus is on sustainability. And as we work with top global engineering companies like Arcadis to support their asset management and public engagement efforts during the development of infrastructure projects. And as you know, a successful program, policy, plan, or project requires the collective input of people who could be affected by its processes and outcomes. This tool, City Shaper, is an enabling tool that helps drive community inclusion in the decision-making process. And we are reimagining the way urban stakeholders engage to improve the communities they serve. We believe in crowdsourcing the wisdom of communities who live, work, visit, and play in the areas consultancy firms help plan, design, and adapt to a changing world. At the Urban Future Lab, we work with two of the most impoverished communities in the nation, Mission San Jose and Quintana Roo. And not only is 1 in 3 residents living at or below the poverty line, but with the proximity to a UNESCO World Heritage Site with an estimated regional economic impact of 100 million, and Port San Antonio, which occupies 22% of the community's footprint with an impact of $5 billion. Both exist in environments that are not activated by this surrounding economic asset. And our research has shown that little data exists about the most vulnerable in our society. And when it comes to understanding the dynamics of poverty, the pilot communities of San Antonio Southside are information deserts. Databases like the American Census do not capture many of the residents in these communities. In our initial research design, we decided to learn as much as we could about the two pilot communities, from global corporations that have a footprint in these communities to small, medium-sized businesses, neighborhood, cultural fabric, infrastructure system, ecology, geography, a holistic, really, approach to understanding these communities. Another one of the building blocks of this project was stakeholder participation, which was key to establishing a working relationship with these two communities. We work with Southside First Economic Development Council, Southside Chamber of Commerce, IRIS was involved, my company, Local Initiative Support Corporation, and we were able to get community leaders at the table and explain why it was important for them to generate localized data that provided a better understanding about their community assets. While real, authentic human interaction and people-to-people engagement was our primary focus, we also employed a hybrid approach to our engagement strategy, which now in COVID-19, it's probably the only one that really makes sense that would allow you to reach out to communities. This meant that parallel to community, event-based, and door-to-door data collection, we used a mobile app, which we developed and then used to broaden the spectrum of collection and collecting knowledge. Ultimately, over 300 residents and community stakeholders participated in a 125 question survey. That's a long survey. But the success was primarily a result of communities' trust and the way they stood behind and were part of the effort. Finally, we use data to elaborate creative outputs that allow us to communicate at different levels with the community. Finishing right now. It's not enough to share data and say you're being transparent. You have to follow up and make sure the community understands the project. This provides a sense of ownership and understanding of the challenges and opportunities they have as a community. And more importantly, how your project will make them more resilient and contribute to improving their quality of life. Thank you, Diane. Sorry for those extra seconds.
Just fine, just fine. 10 minutes is very fast. Fantastic. Next, our last speaker is Steve Graham from Sarah. And Steve, I'll let you take it away. You're on mute, Steve. We see your slides, they're not in presentation mode, and you're on mute.
Okay. Remember, we said we're going to have problems guaranteed. It's just a matter of what. Well, there you go. Well, let me get right into my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see that? Yes?
Yes, though it's not in presentation mode.
Okay.
Try clicking the slideshow at the bottom again.
Let me just go in this mode here, I guess. I'll just call this 80% successful.
Sounds good.
I want to talk a little bit about the smart technologies as applied specifically to like an agency like mine with flood and watershed resiliency. Brian did a good job of talking about the overall concept of what we're talking about here is Smart City 2.0, which is governments delivering products. So he mentioned the 9 partner agencies that are sharing data. And for those of you who have not worked in the government sector, I know it's crazy, but governments don't share information and they don't work well together and they're siloed. So to actually have a data sharing agreement is, crazy enough as it sounds, innovative. But we all know it's really not. It's really the foundation of more efficient, better government, definitely a smart city approach. But these 9 governments, we all acquire terabyte and terabyte and terabyte of data, but we all acquire it differently. We have different standards and metadata, and we don't share. So that is really the first hurdle in any smart city approach, is getting governments to work together, share their information. They're arguably the biggest data generators in a community. So we believe, and it's important that we lead the way. That data sharing then spills over into opportunities for the Smart Cities 3.0, which is what I consider sort of that public-private partnership, where we're delivering products, but we're open to innovation and ideas by others. But we have to respect, different levels of digital literacy and access. So our data sharing is not only between governments, it's also between constituents. And that's not something you see a lot as well. I want to talk specifically about a direct application, which is data acquisition in a very economical way to get the maximum use. This is a device that collects water information that's on the ground, whether that's in a pipe or a culvert or a bridge.
Steve, can I interrupt you and have you change your slides? We're still seeing the first slide.
Okay. You're not seeing different slides?
No, sir, not yet. Did you go to presentation mode?
Let me do it again.
And it's okay. No need to stress out. We're all good here. Like I said at the very beginning, it's all about adapt and overcome. We'll be good.
Steve, I have you. Oh, there we go.
You seen it?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a device which is a very small remote device that measures water. Historically, we've had water sensing devices, but they're working with federal agencies. It usually involves cost of $15,000, $20,000 of cost per year, the installation being even double, triple that. These type devices are in just a couple $1,000 range. The idea is you deploy these devices to get remote telemetry on water surface elevation, rain, things like that. And then that information is then collected and then put out in terms of analysis or applications. Historically, this data collection is a point-to-point kind of where I collect the data and I ship it out just to my use or just to somebody else's. But the future of this real-time data acquisition is in what's called a REST service, which is your data is put up into the cloud, and with proper access, anybody can pull it down. It doesn't require standards to be the same on both the data acquisition and data use sides. So these kind of smart use of data are very integral going forward. This is showing that application of that sensor in place, collecting the information. Again, I mentioned that with the national USGS, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, very expensive, slow on the data acquisition and dissemination. Really, the data acquisition can occur much better, and quite frankly, much higher resolution now than what we've had in the past. This is an example where that data that's collected, both rain gauges and river stream gauges, and we have an application here in Bexar County called bearflood.org. You can actually download it onto your handheld device, and you can see if the roadway that you take to work or when you're going shopping is open or closed. Green means it's open, red means it's closed, yellow means it's rising and you should be careful. You can actually subscribe to this service. And this is part of innovative government, because we can build things and do flood control, but if you aren't making smart decisions, we're not doing our job. So informing you can help you alleviate the risk and mitigate it as much as you can on your side. We're also doing predictive flood modeling. And many of you may say, well, look, doesn't the federal government do predictions of flooding? And the answer is no. They'll tell you that you're going to get 6 to 8 inches of rain due to that hurricane, but they won't tell you where or what that looks like in terms of flood elevation. So we're starting to actually model real time when it's raining, what the water looks like at that time, and we're predicting half hour into the future. So first responders can actually say, you know, in the next half hour, it's going to start coming over US 281. It's going to start flooding this neighborhood. Should we do reverse 911 type broadcasting? So these are the kind of tools that help decision makers. Currently, these tools are used exclusively internally to the city and county staff, but someday we could see where this would be published for the public at large. Also, you know, our consultant community, our scientific community, we put all this information where if you want geospatial data, you want the rainfall information, you can subscribe and download it all in a single library with everything you want to know about rainfall, flood events, water quality. And then for the general public, you know, they can start making decisions about floodplains. You know, unfortunately, in the past, it's been a binary experience. I'm either in a floodplain or I'm not in a floodplain. But it's really not that simple. It's really about your level of risk. So you can put in there, where's my house? In my 30-year loan, what's my chance of getting flooded? Hey, and if it floods, are we talking about 2 inches of deep? Or are we talking about 2 or 3 feet deep into my house? So these kind of things allow people to make decisions, promote good decision making. I'm a big believer that government can't solve the problems, all the problems, maybe the big ones, but people have to solve them based on their knowledge and input to the best of their ability. With that, I'll stop and turn it back over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Steve. Carol, I have a question on timing. Our next agenda item is a panel discussion where we ask the panelists some questions, and it was intended to go for 30 minutes. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I would, I'll tell you what, I think we're just about 10 minutes, a little bit behind. Let's try to shorten that a little bit, so we don't want to take too much out of the breakout groups either. So we'll just kind of take a little bit out of each of those next segments.
Okay, very good. Thanks. So I wanted to start with a question, and everyone that's viewing, you can still go to the Ask a Question and put your question in there. Carol, I'm going to start with one for all of them, and then come back to the one that you asked. I want to start with Dr. Lehr. I know that you had a task force during COVID, and I think COVID is on everyone's minds and what's happening with cities because of COVID. So I wondered what was the work of that task force during COVID, and then have the rest of you also share what your cities have done during COVID.
Okay, well, thank you, Diane. There were a number of things we had to do to respond as a city, as I'm sure folks from San Antonio understand. That one of the things was there's a technology component, and my role was understanding what the private sector and other agencies could deliver in to help us, specifically in testing and in PPE, the equipment that was necessary. In addition, I had connections with the governor's office, and the governor created a couple of task forces, and I was on what was called, I was asked to be part of the governor's innovation task force. And there were two task forces. One on the governor's level was to go procure this stuff, which was sort of going out and competing with other states to get this PPE into Texas. And the other was, the one I was a part of, was can we innovate our way to supplying the PPE, to supply the masks, the ventilators, and the other garments. And in that part, I worked with some private sectors. I worked with Texas State University. I worked with UT to see if we can get some of the labs that were at those universities to generate some of the PPE. And we had some success in that. The others were engaging with testing organizations, specifically on seeing what their, whether the clinics or the technologies could be used to test. Finally, we did some exploration of tracking, and that, for good or poor reasons, became a very political discussion about how you track somebody, the privacy. We had a number of interesting companies come to us. One company actually is the social media platform for one of the presidential candidates, and they came to Austin saying, can we track COVID patients? And we ended up not using any of that. We did more of the epidemiologist wanted to use more of a personal tracking way of engaging our residents rather than some of the mobile phone technologies we used. Well, that's a very brief description of what I was doing. I could go into detail on any one of those if you'd like.
Do you see that these will become part of your smart city technology in the future? Not just.
Well, maybe not the tracking apps. That's still a very, for good reasons, controversial area about what are we doing when we're tracking. And we have to, even if the technology, as a technologist, I'm comfortable with it, perhaps, our residents aren't. And you have to explain it to residents, and it's a hard challenge. That's the biggest challenge of getting comfort levels there. And it's not an easy task. I think what's going to happen, though, is data sharing will be happening. It turns out that our counties and our state and our hospitals are not sharing data sometimes because if they did share data, it was in paper. And it wasn't until the last couple of months we started actually having shared databases of anonymized data about infections and where they're happening. Our hospitals weren't sharing data because it's a business. There's actually business reasons for them not to share data. So there's a number of hurdles. There's privacy concerns. There's business IP concerns that I think will be, I think if I look at its success in the next years or so, I think we'll see success in sharing data that's already there in ways that are secure and private and certainly more efficient, so we can respond and more intelligently, more quickly to if this kind of thing happens again. But with respect to tracking, there's so much, justifiably so, I think, politics around the tracking discussion that I'm not sure where that would go. Go stick your finger in the wind and see which way it's blowing. That's
right. Brian, how about the city of San Antonio?
Yes, so we've gotten to a point where we have a recovery resiliency plan, which includes everything from digital inclusion to housing to health, obviously. But our kind of first foray into this from Office of Innovation specifically was to identify what other cities around the globe are doing. Other countries were getting hit with COVID and the pandemic before we were, so we were trying to discuss with them, what are the responses that you've taken and how can we replicate that? The next level of that was data and dashboards. So our team worked with our IT department, along with obviously Metro Health, to identify what data can we put out here to residents, to community leaders, to decision makers in a dashboard environment, in an online environment that provides that information. So we had our STRAC, our South Texas Regional Alliance, something or other, basically our emergency response folks, all of our first responders were using our dashboards, you know, from there on. If you look at the mayor's briefing every night, Mayor County's briefing, that's our dashboard that they're using on that screen every night. So it was really exciting. It was really, as Ted mentioned, you know, it was really about how do you culminate all that's going on into one kind of, you know, digestible format. And then how do you make sure that trust is built in from the resident side to make sure you're answering questions correctly, make sure all the information is out there as possible, and let them know that sometimes I'm not going to have an answer for you right now. This is brand new to all of us. So yeah, that was one of our big first responses to COVID.
Oh, thank you. We do have a question that segues nicely with all of this. And it is, there seems to be a natural stress between smart city technology and public access and equity. Any ideas about how to bridge that gap? Beto, you want to take that one first? Or anyone jump in?
I can say something to that. In fact, it was just this morning we had a discussion with our equity office, UT Austin, and some of our technology team. And what it has to do with is it's a niche in this kind of thing, but there's a lot of AI technology that cities are being sold, or vendors are coming and doing that. And one thing we don't have is expertise inside the city with respect to data. AI requires a lot of data, and no city really, in my view, has experts in AI. I mean, sometimes the city comes to me in different parts as if I'm some sort of expert in AI. And so what we're putting together is a program. We're bringing different departments that use data, do data analytics, are thinking about using AI, our transportation department, even our police department, our watershed department, our energy department. Are coming in, and we want to work with UT on tools, metrics, policies for cities to use, not just Austin, when we're evaluating AI, and how do we know that the AI is the right AI for what we're doing? We don't know. I mean, I'll give you a story where a vendor came in, they were selling us a chat bot, and I asked the question, well, what was this trained on? And I didn't get a very good answer. We were going to use this for COVID, this chat box, and it was trained on tech support calls. And I asked, well, how many questions do we have to start putting into it before it starts being intelligent? And they said, oh, about 50. And I just said, this is crazy. This is completely, it's just like if I had trained my AI on a geology quiz, and now I gave it a COVID quiz. We don't know how to ask questions in cities like that. So what we're doing, to the question, the audience's question, is we're working with, UT has just got a $20 million grant from the National Science Foundation as an AI institute. It's one of the premier AI institutes in the world. We want to work with that organization to use their expertise to build the tests we need to run, the questions we need to ask, and the policies that we need to implement when we start using AI on the data that we'll be gathering through a smart city.
Great, thank you, Ted. Anyone else want to add to that, bridging the gap?
Well, about the data equity, you know, I think some of the examples that I briefly mentioned in the presentation are, you know, a good first step, right? I mean, there's a lot of, especially in disenfranchised communities, that have this, you know, they're not really trustful about technology. They don't want to share the information. They don't want to, you know, give out something that is very personal to them, because, you know, some of them might be here with a, you know, undefined migratory status, or, you know, they might have something on their criminal records history, and they think that, you know, by exposing themselves might put them in, you know, in a dangerous or you know, uncomfortable position. And so, you know, in that respect, how do you build trust so that they can share information, right? And I think it comes to, you know, a lot of the work that the Office of Innovation is doing in San Antonio, and that, you know, we've done in small, you know, projects in different communities in San Antonio, is reaching out to them, explaining them why it's valuable for them to have information, because if they don't have localized information that represents those communities, they end up being determined by data generalizations that, you know, have that inherent bias in those data sets. And so it is important that, you know, people understand that the more they're able to gather about their communities, the better decisions they're going to be able to do collectively.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add? All right, we had another question about Wi-Fi and internet and how it has become an issue with impoverished school students. Are there any discussions to provide Wi-Fi services in some of those areas? And especially if remote learning is needed for the long term.
I can speak to that, Diane. So the $27 million project that I mentioned earlier about digital inclusion, we started this conversation back in June of last year. And as I mentioned, we did our digital divide assessment, which was really the gap analysis for what digital divide looks like throughout the city of San Antonio and Bexar County. When COVID hit, obviously we had to pick, all right, which avenue do we go down? Not only just is it K through 12 students, is it college students, is it general resident, is it seniors, but also are we focusing in on broadband access? Are we focusing in on access to devices? Are we focusing in on digital literacy? So there was a lot of choices that we had to make. We chose to go down the route of broadband access. And what we're doing right now is we've identified our top 50 most vulnerable neighborhoods, and that's based on our Equity Atlas map, which is on our city's website. It's based on the results of our digital divide assessment. So geographically, which neighborhoods are disconnected, based on American Community Survey report, which actually has a disconnected component to it. And then general conversation. So when COVID hit, we started these weekly meetings with this task force, digital inclusion task force, with about 40 or 50 agencies from UTSA to SAHA and all 15 ISDs. We had them involved to identify where do we want to tackle this. So we're addressing top 50 most vulnerable neighborhoods throughout the city of San Antonio. That's addressing 20,000 students, providing in-home internet access. That's 8 independent school districts throughout the city. And what's going to happen is, and we're actually kicking off our pilot today. If you tune into our Innovation Technology Council Committee today, I'll be briefing there. But our pilot is basically, you'll be your student at home will connect directly into the ISD network. So they won't go into the city of San Antonio's network. They'll connect directly into like San Antonio Independent School District's network. So there's 2 things. One, it keeps the city out of being in the driver's seat of being an internet service provider, which legally we cannot do based on state municipal code 2005, please vote. And then 2, and also make sure that those protections that are typically in place for student safety, security, and privacy are still in place because the students are going through the school district's firewall. So yes, we are taking this on head first. It's definitely something that a lot of cities would love to do and have tried to do in the past. And we're definitely taking strides and making sure that this crisis is an opportunity for us to save some residents along the way.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. Steve, I was wondering if some of the work around construction that you are responsible for, is it P3? How does everything get funded? How does it all work?
Well, I mean, in terms of smart cities, we pretty much are in the Smart City 2.0 mode of operation, which is we fund everything. But that's not where we want to be, like Brian's mentioned. For one thing, we aren't the smartest people in the room. We don't have the lock on innovation. We do have the public need in mind. So I think there's a natural partnership with those who are smart and innovative to understand our missions and to partner with us on delivering these products. I can tell you as an example, Houston, Austin, Fort Worth, and San Antonio, we're all developing predictive flood modeling systems. It's probably not the smartest thing for us each to be doing. City of Austin has a low water crossing app just like ours. We developed it apart from them. So that's not real efficient government. At the same time, we don't want to create monopolies on these applications. So there's probably a sweet spot in the middle where we're not all reproducing the wheel, and each community is spending a lot of money to develop something that maybe was already solved a year ago by a different city. So we see the governmental role. We have funds set aside for this. In time, we hope the partnerships can be a public-private venture. The challenges for us will be the private side wants to make money. That's the definition of being a private sector. You need to make money. Governmental, typically, we're providing the service free of charge, obviously through your taxes. So those are all things we are going to have to think about as we go into that Smart City 3.0 evolution.
Thank you. Do they really need to make money, Beto, you think? One last, actually two quick questions here. One is, since in-person is now challenging, and this is for Beto, do the use of apps and the online public engagement, is it suffering at all because of the lack of being able to be in person?
I think it's the opposite at this time, right? I mean, look at us right now. We are, sharing a virtual space that, before COVID, we'd be gathered at a room, having a more personal discussion, and we all had to adapt to this new environment, and that's true. And we saw the Zoom, right? It became even a verb, right? It's Zooming. And so, practices evolve fast. And what happened is, like with, mobile applications for engagement, for communication, or just applications in general, we basically went from something that was supposed to take, 3 to 5 years to something that happened in 2 to 3 weeks, right? Like everyone had to, shift gears and, online classes, online conferences, and, before, we didn't know back in March that it was going to be so long, right? That we would be almost in November and still, not being able to come back to normal. So I think, this is a definitely for technology, for communication, for collaboration. It's an industry and that will continue to grow because, as I talked a little bit earlier, design and consultancy firms, we talked to a lot of public involvement specialists or public involvement officers and people who need to go out there and collect feedback and talk to communities and inform and town halls and all these things. And now because of COVID, it's difficult to gather all these people in one room, right? Because you have to protect also their safety. So how what is happening now? Well, you have to turn to all these tools to be able to collect this feedback while keeping everyone safe. So I think this is something that was accelerated and it will continue to accelerate because also a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are realizing that, well, we actually didn't need to travel. I hear this in like academic conferences that they're realizing that taking a plane, go to the hotel, check in, and do all this ritual. It's actually just better to do it at your home, and you can still have these amazing conversations and actually, spend more time talking about, ideas rather than just traveling and doing all these things. And so this is happening in different industries as well. I think that a lot of people are realizing that a lot of the things that we used to do things are not necessary anymore. And so we'll see definitely the use of community engagement apps and platforms and software will continue to evolve rapidly.
Right.
Diane, if I give a quick counterpoint, I agree with everything Alberto said. But I do find that, if you're making a digital widget, your job is coding, sure, if you spend 90% of your time behind a screen, you can be more productive, the travel's gone, but there's a lot of things that are lost. It's hard to keep a culture in your corporation, in your business. Communication doesn't always happen in a digital format. In fact, there's a lot of side conversations, there's exchanging business cards, there's incidental conversations that, okay, I didn't know that. And that personal meeting does have value that you're not going to have in a digital environment. I believe the businesses going forward, it's a hybrid approach. Let's keep the best of this COVID technology that's allowed us to avoid travel. But there's still a need to have in-person conversations. Collaboration happens much better in person than on a Zoom environment. So that's what the approach we're taking at my agency is. We're going to learn from the digital things we've learned. I never even got on Teams or Zoom until 9 months ago. So, we're all growing, but I don't want to give up some of the communications that are the old school person-to-person methods.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? We only have about a minute left.
Yeah, I just think there's as Steve said, there's maybe a middle ground. You know, I'm thinking when both gentlemen were talking, I was thinking about my teaching, and you can talk to all the professors at universities now, and it's a very different experience. And some of the vulnerable populations are not doing so well in this environment. Many of the students, not many, but several of the students, and I'm realizing how important that actual physical contact is. And we're seeing more challenges with students who are taking courses virtually. The ability to focus, the ability to stay engaged, the fact that they don't meet their peers on campus is a challenge. So yeah, the technologies are going to be better. These are some of the challenges. We did surveys in the city, and people hated working at home for the first several weeks. Now most of them love it. And to me, we're always measuring in the moment. Well, you know, if you give a kid a video game in that moment, he's going to love that thing. You give a person Facebook, and many times they like Facebook, right? Now, I'm not going to pick on Facebook, but look what 80% of the population thinks Facebook is destroying the country, right? So I'm not saying it is, there's ways of measuring what we're doing that we're not doing currently. We're measuring in the moment, and we're not thinking about longitudinal studies about what is this really doing to our environment.
That's almost like a great smart city plan to be able to do that. Well, thank you all. Wonderful, wonderful. We are going to take a 5-minute break. Is that accurate, Carol?
Well, what we're actually going to do now, Diane, is we'll take a couple minutes to just transition to our next segment, which are the breakout groups. And I want to remind Ted and Diane that you have assigned breakout groups. You each have one of the 4 breakout groups, and want to ask all of our attendees then now in just a second to go ahead and transition using your Whova app to find and select either. We have 4 breakout groups. We have innovation, we have quality of life, we have safety, and we have transportation and autonomous vehicles. So Diane is going to be facilitating innovation, and Beto, you're going to be part of that. Carlos is going to be facilitating the quality of life, and Brian, you're going to be a participant in that. I will be facilitating safety, and Steve, you'll be joining me on that. And then Ted is going to be facilitating transportation and autonomous vehicles. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that little transition. And so we'll just meet everybody in those respective rooms. And our presenters.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
In the discussion, our goal, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, our goal is to come up with 1 or 2 poll questions with multiple choice answers that when we come back together as the large group, we will be able to ask. So the moderator should collect those or craft those with the group.
Right, and correct. All right, and thank you for sharing that too. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes on our breakout groups. Well done.